Top Secret Spies, from Numbers 13 through Numbers 14, verse 35. After leaving Egypt, the freed Hebrew slaves moved through the wilderness on their way to the land God had promised them. Moses and the Israelites were camped just outside the land God had promised to give them. It looked like they would be moving into that amazing land soon. God told Moses in Numbers 13, verses 1 and 2, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Send thou men, that they may search the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers shall ye send a man, every one a ruler among them." So the Lord told Moses to select a leader from each of the 12 tribes to go and spy out the land. God wanted the Israelites to explore the land he was giving them. Remember, God was giving this land to them. There wasn't any question about that in God's mind. Moses selected a man who was a respected leader of his clan from each of the 12 tribes. Let's read Numbers 13, verses 17 through 20, to discover what Moses told these men to find out. "And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said unto them, Get you up this way southward, and go up into the mountain, and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwelleth therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, and what cities they be that they dwell in, whether in tents or in strongholds. And what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not. And be ye of good courage, and bring of the fruit of the land." Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. So off the spies went to find out about the land of Canaan. The spies needed plenty of time to travel into Canaan and find out about the place God had promised them. They saw very tall and strong people who were descendants of Anak. They moved north through the hill country where the Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites lived, and then round the river Jordan and Lake Galilee where they saw Canaanites. The towns and cities were large and well fortified. They went as far north as Rehob before turning back and retracing their steps. When they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. The Israelites waited for the spies to return for nearly a month and a half. While they waited, they probably thought about this marvelous place God was going to give them. They had heard it was a good land, but once the spies returned, they would know just how good it was. After 40 days, finally the day came when the 12 spies arrived back at the Israelites' camp. 2 of the spies were carrying a big pole across their shoulders. On the pole between the men hung the biggest cluster of grapes anyone had ever seen. Other spies had their bags and pockets full of good-tasting pomegranates and figs. Certainly, this land God had promised was the best land ever. 10 of the spies told Moses, "This land is amazing. Look at its fruit. But the people who live there are strong. Their cities are very large with big walls. And we even saw giants." Caleb knew and believed what God had already told them, and so did Joshua. But what God had said and what Caleb and Joshua had said didn't change the other spies' minds. The 10 spies had already decided, "We can't beat the people in this land. They're giants. We look like grasshoppers compared to them." Numbers 14, verses 1 through 3 says, And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron. And the whole congregation said unto them, Would God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would God we had died in this wilderness? And wherefore hath the Lord brought us unto this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? Were it not better for us to return into Egypt? The Israelites cried, they griped, they moaned and complained about Moses and even God. The 10 fearful spies had now managed to scare thousands of people. The people were so upset that they decided to get rid of Moses, elect a new leader, and go back to Egypt. God's miracles, love, and provision were forgotten. Moses and Aaron fell flat on their faces, praying to God with all their hearts. Meanwhile, Caleb and Joshua tried to get the people to remember the promise God had made to the Israelites. But the people talked about killing Moses, Aaron, Caleb, and Joshua. What a problem! What would Moses decide to do now? The Bible says that God had heard everything the people had said. Numbers 14 verses 23 and 24 tells us what God said about these people. Surely they shall not see the land which I swear unto their fathers, neither shall any of them that provoke me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he had another spirit with him, and hath followed me fully, him will I bring into the land whereunto he went, and his seed shall possess it. God said they had treated him with contempt. They talked about him as if he didn't matter, as if he had never done anything for them. Now God said that these people would never see the good land. After all, they did not believe God would give it to them. The 10 spies who brought a bad report died of a plague. Only Joshua and Caleb survived. The spies who trusted in God to keep his promises and give them the land. And God said in Numbers 14, verses 30 through 31, Doubtless ye shall not come into the land concerning which I swear to make you dwell therein, save Caleb the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua the son of Nun. But your little ones, which you said should be a prey, them will I bring in, and they shall know the land which ye have despised. Only the 2 trusting spies, Caleb and Joshua, and the kids, people under 20 years old, would set foot in that amazing land God had promised to give to the Israelites. The Israelites came so close to the land that God promised to give them, but most of them never actually got to see it because they did not trust God. But because Caleb and Joshua trusted in God, even when no one else agreed with them, they got to be a part of God's awesome promise. For the next 40 years, the Israelites wandered around in the wilderness. All those who rebelled against God died. A new generation grew up willing to trust God and take the land God had promised to them under the leadership of Joshua, supported by Caleb. So all the people that doubted and said, we can't go into the land, we can't take the land, we look like grasshoppers, we can't do it, we're scared, they all died in the wilderness. And they wandered around for 40 years till all these people were dead. And only their children and Joshua and Caleb went into the promised land. Joshua and Caleb trusted that God would keep his promises. Even when facing giants, Joshua and Caleb trusted in God and had faith in his promises. And here's our verse today, Psalm 56:11. In God have I put my trust. I will not be afraid what man can do unto me. Let's say it together. In God have I put my trust. I will not be afraid what man can do unto me. Psalm 56:11. Joshua's faith points us to Jesus, and so does his name. Joshua's name means the Lord saves. And if you say Joshua in the Greek language, it's the same word as Jesus. You're saying Jesus. So Joshua's name in the New Testament is Jesus. Just as Joshua led the people into the promised land, Jesus leads all of us, his followers, to salvation and eternal life in heaven. Sometimes we, like Joshua and Caleb, might be the only one of our friends or family who trusts God. But even then, we can hold on to what we know is true. Sometimes you may have to stand alone. You may be the only person that's trusting God. Let's say our verse. In God have I put my trust. I will not be afraid what man can do unto me. Psalm 56:11. When we sit down, we can trust a chair to hold us, right? We don't test the chair and everything. We just trust it, and we sit in the chair and we trust it to hold us. And this is just a small reminder of how much we can trust God. God will give us the strength we need to keep believing him in difficult situations. And this week, when you see a chair, remember to trust God. Even when other people don't trust him, he is always worthy of all of our trust. In God have I put my trust. I will not be afraid what man can do unto me. Psalm 56:11. So this week, remember to trust God with your life, even if other people are not trusting him.
God told Moses, "Send men to scout out the land of Canaan. I am giving this land to the Israelites." Moses sent out one leader from each family tribe. He told the men what to do. Go see what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. Moses had a lot of questions. Is the land good or bad? Are the cities they live in camps or forts? Is the land good for farming? Are there any trees? Moses said, "Be courageous." So the men went and scouted out the land. They traveled around the land for 40 days. They cut down a cluster of grapes in the valley and carried it on a pole. Then they went back to Moses, Aaron, and the Israelite community to tell them what they saw. "The land is good. It is flowing with milk and honey," they said. "But the people living in the land are strong, and the cities they live in are large and well protected." Then Caleb, one of the spies, said, "We must go up and take possession of the land. We can certainly conquer it with God's help." But the other men disagreed. "The people are stronger than we are. We look like grasshoppers compared to them." The Israelites were afraid and they cried all night. They thought Moses and Aaron had brought them to Canaan to die. The Israelites said, "Let's appoint a new leader and go back to Egypt." Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the Israelites. Joshua and Caleb, who had both scouted out the land, tore their clothes and said to the Israelites, "The land is extremely good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will give it to us. Don't be afraid of the people living in the land. God is with us." The Lord spoke to Moses, "How long will these people despise me? How long will they not trust me?" God threatened to destroy all the people, but Moses said, "Please forgive the wrongdoing of the people. I know you are great, faithful, and loving." God replied, "Since you have asked, I will forgive them. But none of them who despise me will live to see the promised land of Canaan." Since Caleb and Joshua had followed God completely, God would let them enter the promised land. God said that the Israelites who did not trust God would face consequences for their sin. They would wander in the wilderness 40 years, and they would not enter the promised land. All of the spies who went to scout out the land died, except for Joshua and Caleb. Caleb and Joshua trusted God. God planned for Joshua to lead the next generation of Israelites into the promised land. Joshua was not perfect, but his faithfulness reminds us of Jesus, who is perfect. Jesus obeyed the Father and trusted his plan to save people from their sins.
God told Moses to send men to go and check out the land of Canaan. Canaan was the land God promised to give to Abraham, the father of the Israelites. Moses selected 12 men. He sent them to spy out what the land and the people there were like. The spies spent 40 days checking out the land of Canaan before returning to Moses. The spies said that the land was a good land, filled with milk and honey. The men showed the people fruit from the land of Canaan, a large cluster of grapes it took 2 men to carry. But 10 of the spies gave a bad report about the land of Canaan. They said the people of Canaan were too powerful and would destroy the Israelites. After hearing the bad report, the people of Israel complained and wished to go back to Egypt. But Joshua and Caleb, the 2 other spies, told the people to trust in the Lord. God was strong enough to defeat the enemies of Canaan, they said. The people did not trust God. So God told Moses he would destroy them. But Moses asked God to forgive the people, and God did. Still, God told the people and the 10 spies they could not go into the promised land of Canaan. Instead, they would wander around and around in the desert for 40 years. After 40 years, only Joshua and Caleb and the children would go into the promised land.
Hi, it's Norman here. Are you ready for today's Bible story? Let's pick up where we left off. Okay, God had rescued the Israelites from Egypt, and they escaped into the wilderness. God was leading them to a very special place called the Promised Land. Moses sent spies into the Promised Land to see what it was like. But what did they find? Let's watch and find out.
God told Moses, "Send men to scout out the land of Canaan I am giving to the Israelites." Moses said to the men, "Be courageous." Moses sent them just as God commanded. Moses had a lot of questions he wanted answered. Is the land good or bad? Are the cities they live in camps or forts? Is the land fertile or unproductive? Are there trees in it or not? So the men went and scouted out the land. They traveled around the land for 40 days. When they were in the valley, they cut down a cluster of grapes and carried it on a pole. Then they went back to Moses, Aaron, and the Israelites' community. They reported to Moses, "We went into the land where you sent us. Indeed, it is flowing with milk and honey. However, the people in the land are strong, and the cities they live in are large and fortified. We saw groups of people living in the land and along the sea." Caleb, one of the spies sent to scout out the land, said, "We must go up and take possession of the land. We can certainly conquer it with God's help." The other men disagreed. "We can't go up against the people. They are stronger than we are. We look like grasshoppers compared to them." All of the Israelites started crying, and they cried all night. They thought Moses and Aaron had brought them to Canaan to die. They said, "Let's appoint a new leader and go back to Egypt." Joshua and Caleb, who were among those who scouted out the land, tore their clothes and said to the Israelite community, "The land we passed through and explored is extremely good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will give it to us. Don't be afraid of the people living in the land. God is with us." God asked Moses, "How long will these people not trust me?" God wanted to destroy all the people, but Moses said, "Please pardon the wrongdoing of the people. I know you are great, faithful, and loving." God replied, "Since you have asked, I will forgive them. But none of them who despise me will live to see the promised land of Canaan." Since Caleb and Joshua had followed God completely, God decided to let them enter the promised land. Out of all the spies who went to scout out the land, all of them died except for Joshua and Caleb. Even though Joshua was not perfect, he lived a life of obedience to God. Joshua was faithful and was going to lead the people into the promised land. His accomplishments point to Christ's finished work on the cross, defeating Satan, setting people free from sin, and making a way into the promised land of eternity.
Sin has a price, but God forgives when people seek forgiveness. The Israelites were scared when they heard the spies' report. They cried and did not trust God. God wanted to destroy them, but Moses asked for forgiveness instead. God forgave, but because only Joshua and Caleb trusted God, only they would be allowed to enter the promised land. I'll see you later.